Thank you so much for all you do. It simply wouldn't work without you. And thank you for going on to inspire so many young people. To all the supporters here today, thank you.
You won't believe what Prince Edward just pulled off, and nobody in the royal family saw it coming. King Charles was utterly convinced that as monarch, he had total power to strip away royal homes, seize historic family heirlooms, and rewrite the rules however he wanted. But he made one fatal mistake.
Prince Edward's lawyers have officially confirmed that King Charles has been holding assets for years that legally, rightfully, and provably belong to his youngest brother.
Edward didn't scream or leak to the tabloids. Instead, he unleashed an ironclad legal dossier and a secret, dying father's warning that left the palace utterly paralyzed. In a brutal, jaw-dropping showdown that shook the monarchy to its absolute core, Edward proved a terrifying reality. Nobody breaks the family like a quiet prince armed with the ultimate legal trap. When examining the institutional mechanics of the British monarchy, public attention is frequently drawn to the pageantry, state processions, and ceremonial duties that populate the media landscape. Beneath these visible layers, however, operates a dense administrative apparatus governed by property law, state estate management, and commercial leasing agreements. Within this legal framework, Bagshot Park functions as a prime illustration of how long-term planning and corporate structuring can protect a residential asset from shifting political and institutional pressures. The sprawling 19th century mansion and its surrounding 51 acres of grounds inside Windsor Great Park represent one of the most substantial private country residences occupied by a working member of the royal family. The origins of this particular occupancy trace back to the late 1990s, a period when the property required substantial intervention to restore its functionality. Previously utilized by the Royal Army Chaplains Department, the buildings had suffered from years of vacancy and limited maintenance, leading the Crown Estate to evaluate alternative commercial futures for the site, including proposals for a hotel or a conference center. Rather than pursuing commercial conversion, the Crown Estate entered into an agreement in March 1998, granting Prince Edward an initial 50-year lease over the main house, a block of stables, and adjacent lodges. Taking over the estate came with immediate financial and logistical responsibilities. Official historical records and administrative audits demonstrate that the property required an extensive capital restoration project to render it habitable. The total cost of these initial renovations reached approximately £3 million. Under the terms of the arrangement, the costs were shared, with the Crown Estate covering a portion while Prince Edward contributed more than £1,300,000 of private funds to address the excess expenses. Following the completion of these repairs, an annual rent of £90,000 was established, a figure that oversight bodies formally categorized as reflecting the prevailing open market value for a historic residential property of that magnitude. A significant turning point in the administrative history of the estate occurred in 2007, when the terms of the occupancy were fundamentally restructured. Rather than allowing the property to remain subject to periodic market rent reviews and standard lease constraints, a long-term corporate arrangement was executed. Utilizing a corporate entity designated as Eclipse Nominees Limited, the lease was extended to a total duration of 150 years. This transaction involved an upfront capital payment of £5 million to the Crown Estate, effectively locking in the occupancy rights for multiple generations and shifting the financial structure away from annual commercial rent toward a nominal peppercorn rate. This corporate and legal framework provided an extraordinary degree of insulation. As administrative priorities within the wider royal household evolved over the subsequent decades, properties held by various family members occasionally became subjects of public debate and internal governmental review. Questions surrounding historical property portfolios, asset valuations, and lease terms frequently attract scrutiny from oversight committees and transparency campaigners. However, because the tenancy at Bagshot Park was anchored by a formal, multi-decade lease extension, backed by a substantial upfront capital premium and corporate backing, it occupied a distinct legal category. The presence of corporate structuring through Eclipse Nominees Limited meant that the agreement was governed by strict commercial and property statutes rather than informal royal consensus. While administrative reviews conducted by central authorities routinely analyze how royal residences are managed, altering or terminating a binding long-term lease backed by significant financial investment presents complex legal barriers. Furthermore, the lease terms granted flexibility regarding the management of auxiliary structures on the grounds, including the historic stable block. Over the years, portions of the estate infrastructure were integrated into private operational use, demonstrating a high degree of administrative autonomy that set the residence apart from simpler, more vulnerable royal housing arrangements. This level of structural preparation proved vital as broader institutional efforts emerged to streamline royal assets and centralize administrative control under the reigning monarch. When central authorities initiate reviews of family properties and operational expenditures, existing contracts are frequently tested against modern standards of public accountability. Yet, because the legal boundaries of Bagshot Park had been so meticulously drawn through upfront market-tested premiums and corporate lease extensions, any attempt by Central Palace management to unilaterally alter the terms would encounter severe legal friction. The resilience of this arrangement highlights a broader reality of modern estate management within the royal sphere. While public perception often assumes that the sovereign possesses absolute unilateral authority over every roof and room associated with the family, the actual administration of crown and private property is strictly mediated by centuries of property law, legally binding contracts, and corporate entities. Through proactive financial investment, long-term leasing strategies, and corporate oversight, the residency was transformed from a neglected institutional burden into a legally impregnable asset. Consequently, when institutional pressures later arose to reevaluate how family members utilized crown-linked properties, the occupants of Bagshot Park were uniquely positioned to withstand external challenges. The combination of the £5 million capital injection, the 150-year term, and the corporate protections established via Eclipse Nominees Limited ensured that the estate remained entirely outside the reach of sudden administrative restructuring. This foundational layer of legal engineering established a precedent of independence, proving that rigorous adherence to formal property law could successfully shield a household from the shifting whims of Central Palace administration. To fully understand the strength of this position, one must also look at how other residential properties within the wider family were managed during the same time frame. While certain relatives maintained residences under informal or favorable arrangements that left them vulnerable to public criticism and subsequent administrative overhauls, the household in Surrey operated with strict adherence to commercial protocols. The National Audit Office and parliamentary committees have frequently examined the financial transparency of royal estates, often highlighting discrepancies in how different properties account for market rate rents and maintenance costs. By consistently meeting or exceeding formal valuation standards, paying market-linked rents prior to the corporate lease extension, and investing personal capital into the restoration of a deteriorating architectural landmark, the occupants established an unassailable record of compliance and financial independence. This meticulous paper trail served as an effective shield when internal policies began to shift toward greater centralization. Administrative reforms within large institutions often seek to consolidate power by reviewing historical concessions and bringing outlying assets back under direct central oversight. However, when an estate is held through a legally registered corporate vehicle with a multi-decade horizon, ordinary internal directives carry very little weight. Property law supersedes palace preference, and commercial leases negotiated in good faith with the Crown Estate cannot simply be undone by a change in executive management or a new sovereign's administrative vision. Furthermore, the physical and historical context of the estate adds another layer of security. Situated within the boundaries of Windsor Great Park, the property is geographically and symbolically tied to the Crown lands, yet its day-to-day operation is dictated by explicit contractual clauses. The initial negotiations in 1998 established a clear precedent that the tenant would shoulder the overwhelming financial burden of rehabilitation in exchange for long-term security. When a private individual injects millions of pounds into a structure that the state was previously considering converting into a commercial conference center, the resulting property rights are robustly defended by both common law and equity. As a result, the administrative landscape surrounding the estate remained remarkably stable, even as other parts of the royal portfolio faced intense public scrutiny and internal restructuring. The strategic foresight demonstrated in securing the 150-year extension through Eclipse Nominees Limited ensured that any future attempts to reclaim or revalue the asset would be met with an impenetrable wall of corporate documentation. This careful planning laid the groundwork for a broader institutional dynamic, demonstrating that when faced with changing tides at the top of the monarchy, comprehensive legal preparation remains the most effective form of defense. The administrative foundation established through commercial leases and corporate entities found its ultimate validation in the personal directives issued by Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip during the final years of their lives. While structural planning protected the physical grounds of the estate, a separate layer of documentary armor was required to secure the personal allocations, honors, and historical items that defined the daily lives of the working household. Long before modern institutional reviews began examining family assets under contemporary standards of transparency, the late sovereign took deliberate steps to ensure that the gifts and tokens of trust granted to her youngest son and his wife remained entirely outside the reach of future administrative reinterpretation. In the period preceding September 2022, the late Queen observed the evolving pressures surrounding the institution, noting a growing institutional focus on centralizing control over properties, titles, and valuables. Recognizing that subsequent administrations might seek to alter long-standing arrangements under the banner of modernization, a series of formal instruments were executed to lock in these decisions permanently. Among these proactive measures was a carefully drafted letter of intent, explicitly connecting the residential estate to the ducal title itself. This document was formally witnessed by Prince Philip during his final months, providing a dual layer of sovereign authority that anchored the residential arrangement to the highest levels of the royal family. The inclusion of Prince Philip's signature carried immense strategic weight. Having spent more than 7 decades observing the internal workings of the monarchy, he understood how administrative bodies within the central household could quietly pivot against outlying assets when institutional priorities shifted. By lending his name to the document alongside the Queen, he ensured that the arrangement possessed historical backing that could not easily be dismissed as a temporary or informal concession. This written expression of intent served as a formidable bridge between commercial property law and sovereign prerogative, establishing beyond ambiguity that the provisions made for the household were intended to endure for the lifetime of the occupants. This careful documentary trail extended directly into the realm of personal property, specifically addressing the historical jewelry and tokens presented to members of the family who maintained a steady record of public service. Over her 70-year reign, the late monarch distributed various personal items as expressions of trust and appreciation. When internal policy discussions later turned toward auditing and potentially reclaiming such items under centralized asset reviews, the existence of formal deeds of gift proved to be an insurmountable obstacle for any incoming administrative team. Every allocation was backed by verifiable paperwork, ensuring that personal milestones and family recognitions remained legally insulated from shifting palace directives. The foresight demonstrated in recording these decisions fundamentally altered the balance of internal power, proving that the authority of a reigning sovereign remained strictly bounded by valid legal commitments executed by preceding monarchs. By maintaining meticulous records and securing every agreement through proper legal channels, the household created an unassailable defensive position. When subsequent institutional pressures finally emerged to reevaluate how family members utilized crown-linked privileges, the comprehensive paper trail was already in place to meet every challenge with absolute clarity, ensuring that the explicit intentions of the previous reign could not be quietly dismantled behind closed doors. To expand further upon these mechanisms, one must consider the meticulous nature of royal record-keeping and how administrative precedents are maintained across generations. Every legal instrument executed by a sovereign is meticulously filed, registered, and cross-referenced within official archives, ensuring that future legal teams have immediate access to authentic documents whenever disputes arise regarding property or personal estates. The deliberate foresight of utilizing witnesses of such high standing as Prince Philip ensured that any questioning of these documents by modern palace officials would face immediate structural resistance. The administrative weight carried by a jointly witnessed royal letter creates a legal benchmark that cannot easily be dismissed by subsequent reigning monarchs or their advisors, regardless of how aggressively they pursue internal cost-cutting measures or asset centralization programs. Furthermore, the legal philosophy underpinning these protective documents reflects a deep institutional understanding of historical vulnerabilities. Within the extended royal family, individuals who operate outside the immediate direct line of succession often find themselves more susceptible to shifting political winds and changing administrative priorities within the core palace structure. Recognizing this perennial vulnerability, the late queen engineered an administrative environment where personal security and residential permanence were guaranteed by codified law rather than familial goodwill. This distinction is vital because goodwill is inherently fleeting and subject to the personal preferences of whoever holds the reigning seat, whereas formal deeds of gift, witnessed letters of intent, and registered corporate leases possess binding legal authority that outlasts individual reigns. The interplay between these written safeguards and the overarching structure of the crown creates a fascinating study in institutional self-defense. When a royal household prepares for the inevitable transition of power, the accumulation of ironclad legal proof serves as the primary currency of survival. Without such documentation, individuals rely entirely on the shifting moods and modernization agendas of the reigning king or queen, leaving them exposed to unexpected audits, public controversies, and administrative demands for property surrender. By anticipating these exact scenarios, the household ensured that every asset, honor, and residential right was heavily fortified against future political maneuvering. The comprehensive paper trail also provided an invaluable strategic advantage when institutional tensions eventually reached their peak. When central administrative bodies attempted to question the legitimacy of long-held personal items and residential agreements, they were met not with emotional appeals or informal negotiations, but with irrefutable legal dossiers containing precise dates, signatures, corporate filings, and witnessed letters of intent. This decisive approach effectively neutralized potential conflicts before they could escalate into damaging public scandals, preserving both the dignity of the institution and the personal rights of the individuals involved. Ultimately, this meticulous preparation demonstrated that the most effective way to navigate the turbulent waters of modern royal administration is through unwavering adherence to formal legal protocol and thorough advance documentation. When administrative policies within the central palace began to intersect with the personal lives and property holdings of extended family members, the resulting friction created an environment of heightened tension. Central to this unfolding dynamic was an administrative review that extended beyond real estate into the realm of personal historical possessions, specifically targeting items of jewelry that had been integrated into the daily public and private life of the household for decades. This phase of the institutional pivot brought long-standing questions of ownership, heritage classification, and crown property definitions to the forefront, transforming routine administrative audits into high-stakes discussions regarding the boundaries of personal property versus institutional assets. The focus of this particular administrative inquiry centered upon a prominent piece of headwear created specifically for the wedding ceremony held in 1999. Commissioned during the final years of the previous century, the item was designed using antique elements sourced from historical royal collections, specifically incorporating 4 distinct decorative sections shaped in a classic honeysuckle motif originating from the Victorian era. For nearly 25 years, this specific piece had served as the primary and frequently the sole formal headwear worn by the Duchess of Edinburgh during major state events, family celebrations, and public engagements. Because the individual in question was never granted open or routine access to the broader collection of grand state tiaras maintained within the central royal vaults, a privilege traditionally reserved for those closer to the direct line of succession, this single custom-made piece held immense personal and symbolic value. As the new administrative framework took shape under the current reign, representatives acting on behalf of the central household initiated a review of historical jewelry allocations, framing the process as a routine heritage check and inventory audit. However, the underlying premise of the audit carried profound implications. The argument advanced through administrative channels suggested that because the piece incorporated stones and historical elements derived from Victorian-era collections, it could technically be classified as crown property rather than a personal gift. Under this interpretation, the item should rightfully be housed within the central vault structure and issued out only on a case-by-case basis for official duties, effectively stripping the wearer of permanent ownership and reducing a cherished wedding present to a temporary loan requiring explicit palace permission for future use. This line of reasoning presented a significant tactical challenge, as accepting such a precedent would open the door to a much broader reinterpretation of historical gifts distributed across decades by the late Queen. If a custom wedding present created with antique elements could be retroactively reclassified as a state asset, virtually every personal token, honor, and private gift given during the previous 70-year reign could theoretically be subjected to similar demands for reclamation. Recognizing the sweeping danger of this administrative stance, the legal team representing the Edinburgh household moved swiftly to dismantle the argument at its structural foundation, rather than engaging in prolonged informal negotiations or emotional appeals. The response was grounded in a definitive legal instrument executed in 1999, a formal deed of gift signed by Queen Elizabeth II. This document explicitly classified the wedding piece as a private gift belonging exclusively to the recipient, independent of any state trust, shared asset pool, or central vault inventory. By presenting an explicit, legally binding deed, the legal representatives effectively neutralized the classification argument, proving that the item was never a temporary loan. Furthermore, the defense was reinforced by highlighting additional honors bestowed upon the recipient directly by the late monarch, such as the Royal Victorian Order, which underscored the personal nature of the sovereign's trust and reinforced the validity of the private allocations. To further solidify this defensive position, the legal dossier incorporated an additional layer of technical and artistic documentation. Years prior, when the wedding piece was originally commissioned, the household had collaborated with master royal jewelers to design a matching set of pearl jewelry, comprising a necklace and earrings specifically engineered to complement the exact dimensions and aesthetic of the historic elements within the headwear. While the raw materials for this companion set had involved crown-related procurement paths, the design rights and artistic configuration were held firmly by Prince Edward. Consequently, the legal team formulated a powerful argument, establishing that the headwear and the matching pearl suite constituted a single, indivisible artistic and legal unit. Dismantling one component would require dismantling the integrity of a protected design portfolio, adding yet another layer of commercial and property law defense against administrative overreach. Despite the presentation of these irrefutable documents, the internal atmosphere surrounding the audit remained tense, reflecting broader anxieties about legacy, reputation, and control within the changing institution. Historical precedent loomed large over the discussions as observers and insiders recalled previous instances where personal gifts given to prominent family members following major life transitions had been reclaimed and placed back into the central royal vaults. The memory of past controversies involving high-profile jewelry and personal effects served as a constant reminder of how vulnerable private allocations could be when exposed to shifting palace politics. Therefore, allowing the administrative review to proceed unchallenged was viewed as an unacceptable risk that could permanently undermine the autonomy of the household. As the standoff reached a critical juncture, the legal strategy shifted from defensive document presentation to an assertive boundary-setting maneuver. By the late afternoon of the specified review date, the representatives delivered a clear and forceful warning to the central administrative offices. If the formal claim regarding the contested piece of jewelry was not immediately and unconditionally withdrawn, the household would be prepared to release additional private correspondence from the late Queen. These archived letters, carefully preserved within private family records, contained explicit statements detailing the sovereign's personal wishes regarding the permanent ownership of the jewelry, and also touched upon broader historical tensions within the wider royal family dynamics. The implicit threat of releasing such sensitive archival material carried profound institutional weight. Public exposure of private correspondence from the late Queen, particularly communications reflecting complex internal relationships and historical distances between key family members, presented a severe public relations risk for the Central Palace administration. Over many years, considerable effort had been dedicated to shaping public perception and stabilizing the image of the reigning leadership. Introducing unvarnished private letters into the public domain threatened to unravel years of careful image management, turning a localized property dispute into a major institutional controversy that would inevitably dominate global headlines and invite intense parliamentary and media scrutiny. Faced with this immovable legal wall and the sobering prospect of archival disclosures, the Central Palace administration had little room to maneuver. The administrative machinery that had been set in motion to review, audit, and potentially reclaim the private allocation ground to a halt. Rather than issuing a public retreat, the resolution was handled through formal administrative channels with characteristic discretion, ensuring that the integrity of the paperwork was formally acknowledged without triggering a wider public spectacle. Late in the day, a formal communication issued from the appropriate office confirmed that the contested item would remain under the exclusive private control of its rightful owner, closing the door on the audit permanently. At the same time, the broader review concerning the Surrey residential estate was quietly shelved, effectively halting all pressure to alter or reevaluate the long-term lease arrangements. The outcome was total and absolute. Every asset, residential right, and personal gift defended by the household remained precisely where the late Queen had placed them, fully secured by the formidable combination of deeds of gift, corporate leases, and strategic legal readiness. This decisive resolution sent shockwaves through the internal hierarchy of the institution, fundamentally altering how administrative directives from the center would be received by outlying family branches. It demonstrated unequivocally that modern palace management could not simply rely on executive authority or administrative pressure to override historical legal commitments executed by previous sovereigns. The meticulous preparation undertaken by the household, spanning decades of careful corporate structuring, financial investment, and documentary preservation, had successfully withstood the most rigorous test imaginable. Reflecting upon this episode, institutional analysts noted that the event marked a permanent shift in the internal balance of power within the monarchy. It exposed the inherent limitations of centralizing authority in an institution deeply bound by historical property law and formal contracts. While public-facing ceremonies would continue to project an image of seamless unity and traditional harmony, the reality behind closed doors had evolved into a landscape defined by strict legal boundaries, protected assets, and vigilant defense of private rights. The household had proven that when confronted with institutional pressure, the most reliable armor is not found in royal favor, but in the unwavering enforcement of the rule of law. While the legal dossier and the threat of archival disclosures effectively neutralized the jewelry audit and halted the residential review, the resolution of the dispute did not occur within the quiet confines of legal offices alone. As the institutional friction intensified, the conflict moved from administrative channels into a deeply personal sphere, drawing in other senior figures within the royal family whose intervention fundamentally altered the trajectory of the standoff. Among these figures, the involvement of Princess Anne marked a critical turning point, transforming a localized disagreement between households into a foundational test of sovereign credibility and institutional integrity. To understand the weight of this intervention, one must examine the evolving relationships within the family during the years leading up to these events. Historically, the bond between the Princess Royal and the Duchess of Edinburgh had been characterized by a degree of polite distance. Both individuals maintained demanding schedules of public service, yet their interactions were traditionally formal rather than intensely close. However, the profound structural losses experienced by the family in the early part of the decade served as a powerful catalyst for unity. Following the passing of Prince Philip and subsequently Queen Elizabeth II, both women stepped forward to provide steady, unyielding support to the late monarch, during her final year. This shared burden forged a deep, quiet alliance grounded in mutual respect and a shared understanding of duty. By the time of the late Queen's funeral, public observers noted subtle gestures of warmth and solidarity between them, reflecting a transition from mere professional colleagues within the institution to steadfast allies. When the administrative pressures and asset audits began to target the Edinburgh household under the new reign, this quiet connection transformed into an active, protective force. When Princess Anne stepped into the private meeting rooms of Buckingham Palace to address the unfolding crisis, she did so not merely as a sister defending a sibling, but as a senior guardian of the institution's historical continuity and moral authority. Her entry into the discussions was direct, unsentimental, and devoid of diplomatic pleasantries. Drawing upon decades of unblemished service and an intimate knowledge of how the monarchy operated across multiple generations, she confronted the reigning king with an unvarnished assessment of the administrative path the central palace was pursuing. Her core argument struck at the very heart of royal governance. She emphasized that the authority of a reigning sovereign depends entirely on the inviolable trust placed in the commitments, signatures, and legal instruments executed by those who held the office before them. If the written words, leases, and deeds of gift signed by the late Queen could be summarily dismissed, reinterpreted, or cast aside by an incoming administration, then the foundational word of the crown would be rendered entirely meaningless. To underscore her point, Anne explicitly referenced the extensive documentation surrounding Bagshot Park, noting that she had personally reviewed the legal agreements, financial records, and historical audits governing the estate. She reminded the central administration that Prince Edward had injected substantial private capital into the restoration of a decaying historic structure at a time when the Crown Estate considered it a commercial liability. The terms of that agreement were clear, reciprocal, and legally binding. Attempting to unwind such an arrangement under the guise of modernization or administrative centralization did not demonstrate strength. It signaled a dangerous disregard for contractual law and institutional stability. Furthermore, Anne broadened her defense to encompass the personal items and historical gifts targeted by the recent jewelry audits. She maintained that treating a wedding present given by the late sovereign as a temporary state loan was a catastrophic error in judgment that opened a Pandora's box of retroactive confiscations. If personal tokens of affection and service presented by the late Queen could be audited and reclaimed, the door would be thrown open to challenge allocations across the entire family, destabilizing relations and inviting intense public cynicism. She made it unmistakably clear that both the residential estate and the personal jewelry represented the exact same principle: the absolute sanctity of a sovereign's final decisions. Beyond property and assets, the intervention touched upon deeply personal matters regarding the next generation of the family. Quiet administrative pressures had begun to circulate regarding the future status of Edward and Sophie's children, with suggestions that their protected positions and security allocations might be curtailed earlier than originally anticipated, pushing them prematurely into fully private status. Anne met this proposal with absolute resistance. She asserted that decisions concerning the upbringing, timing of public roles, and security of the younger generation belong strictly to their parents, not to central palace advisors or external administrative directives. Drawing from her own parenting philosophy, having chosen a private path for her own children years earlier entirely by personal choice rather than institutional coercion, she made it clear that manufactured pressure regarding the younger family members would not be tolerated. The psychological dimension of Anne's intervention was equally profound. Having lost both of her parents in rapid succession, she understood intimately the emotional weight attached to the physical belongings and residential spaces left behind by those who had passed away. When she observed the central administration attempting to strip away a home and a treasured wedding gift from someone who viewed the late Queen as a maternal figure, she did not see a routine portfolio adjustment. She saw an unnecessary cruelty directed against individuals who had remained utterly loyal, scandal-free, and dedicated to the crown through decades of public life. This empathetic clarity fueled her resolve, ensuring that her defense was morally unassailable as well as legally robust. Realizing that conventional arguments were failing to halt the overreach, Anne deployed a strategic deterrent of her own. She made it known that if the attempts to undermine the Edinburgh household and question personal allocations did not cease immediately, she would take decisive action extending far beyond private meetings. Specifically, she indicated her willingness to oversee a comprehensive public financial audit of the central royal household, scrutinizing expenses, staffing allocations, and operational expenditures tied directly to the core administration. Given Anne's decades-long reputation for financial discipline, operational transparency, and unwavering commitment to duty, her threat carried immense credibility. The Central Palace administration understood all too well that an independent, publicly backed review of internal expenditures led by the Princess Royal would unleash an uncontrollable media storm, dwarfing any temporary gains from reclaiming a single tiara or residential lease. This combination of unassailable constitutional logic, fierce personal loyalty, and a credible institutional counterthreat completely paralyzed the Central Palace's strategy. The king and his closest advisors were left with a stark choice. Persist with a divisive administrative campaign that risked fracturing the family beyond repair and exposing the central office to damaging public scrutiny, or step back and respect the boundaries established by the late sovereign. The sheer weight of Anne's presence and the absolute firmness of her stance ensured that the outcome was inevitable. By the evening of March 25th, the institutional retreat was complete. The formal communication dispatched from the master of the jewel house, confirming the permanent retention of the wedding tiara, alongside the quiet shelving of the Bagshot Park Review, marked the formal surrender of the central administration. Every asset, title, and personal token remained securely in the hands of their rightful owners, fully protected by the triple shield of meticulous corporate leasing, witnessed letters of intent, and fierce familial defense. The long-term fallout from this intense standoff reshaped the internal landscape of the British monarchy in ways that would endure for generations. The institution was no longer perceived as a monolithic entity, operating under the absolute, unquestioned will of a single reigning monarch. Instead, it had evolved into a complex, decentralized structure defined by distinct power centers. On one side stood the central administration at Buckingham Palace, striving to project an image of streamlined modernization and tight operational control. On the other side stood a robust coalition of senior royals, anchored by Princess Anne, Prince Edward, and the Duchess of Edinburgh, and supported quietly by the Prince and Princess of Wales, who proved entirely capable of holding a firm line against administrative overreach. For the younger members of the household, such as James and Lady Louise, this quiet victory served as a profound lesson in resilience and preparedness. They witnessed firsthand how their parents navigated a high-stakes institutional crisis without resorting to public emotional outbursts, media leaks, or theatrical confrontations. Instead, the defense was mounted through the quiet power of documentation, legal foresight, unyielding solidarity, and strategic resolve. Publicly, the royal family would continue to project an image of seamless harmony, standing shoulder to shoulder on balconies and during national commemorations to satisfy the expectations of the public and the press. The pageantry would persist, the state processions would continue on schedule, and the grand traditions of the crown would be faithfully performed for the cameras. But beneath that polished veneer, everyone within the inner circle of the institution knew the precise reality of what had transpired. They knew that a serious challenge to the established order had been mounted, that the central authority of the throne had been successfully tested by the rule of law, and that an immovable boundary had been drawn. The historical record of that day now rests securely within the official archives, a permanent testament to the limits of royal prerogative when confronted with thorough preparation and unwavering familial unity. It demonstrated for all time that while a crown may grant titles and estates, the true preservation of a household depends on the vigilance of those willing to protect its foundational legacy. Through meticulous legal engineering, strategic foresight, and an unshakable commitment to the intentions of the past, the Edinburgh household ensured that their home, their history, and their dignity remained entirely beyond the reach of institutional turbulence, securing their place within the monarchy on their own terms. while the formal surrender of the central administration on March 25th brought an end to the immediate crisis. The institutional aftershocks of the confrontation permanently altered the internal architecture of the British monarchy. What had begun as an administrative review of property leases and historical jewelry evolved into a defining test of power, exposing deep structural fractures within the royal household that could no longer be patched over with traditional pageantry and public smiles. The resolution of the dispute did not restore the pre-existing status quo. Rather, it established a permanent new reality characterized by decentralized authority, hardened internal alliances, and a quiet but profound erosion of trust at the highest levels of the institution. To comprehend the full scope of this transformation, one must examine how the daily operations of the royal family shifted in the wake of the standoff. Prior to these events, the assumption had largely prevailed that the reigning sovereign possessed an overarching prerogative to reorganize family assets, adjust residential portfolios, and redefine historical allocations as part of a broader modernization agenda. The swift and decisive defeat of the central administration's initiatives shattered that assumption once and for all. By relying on an unassailable dossier of commercial leases, corporate protections, witnessed letters of intent, and historic deeds of gift, Prince Edward and his legal team established a permanent precedent. They proved that royal prerogative is strictly bounded by formal property law and the documented commitments of preceding monarchs, creating a protective shield that future administrative teams will find virtually impossible to pierce. This outcome inevitably generated severe internal friction among the key principals involved in the governance of the household. The relationship between King Charles III and Prince Edward shifted from a standard fraternal dynamic into something strictly formal, cautious, and limited strictly to the requirements of public duty. While both men understood the necessity of maintaining a unified front for external observers, the reality behind closed doors was entirely different. The knowledge that one brother had been forced to deploy a high-powered legal defense team and threaten archival disclosures to protect his home and his wife from the policies driven by the king, and Queen Camilla created a permanent psychological barrier. That kind of defensive necessity does not simply fade away with the signing of an administrative note. It leaves an enduring mark on family relations, transforming personal warmth into calculated diplomacy. Furthermore, the mechanics of the palace itself experienced a profound internal realignment. During the height of the tension, staff members, private secretaries, and administrative personnel found themselves quietly choosing sides, recognizing that the competing visions of the monarchy represented fundamentally different futures for the institution. The aggressive push by the central office to audit personal gifts and reclaim residential assets alienated long-serving personnel who viewed such actions as a breach of institutional tradition and personal loyalty. As resentment toward the central administration spread among household staff, traditional walls of confidentiality began to weaken. Information, internal memos, and strategic thinking flowed more freely than ever before, illustrating that a palace divided against itself cannot maintain the airtight operational control upon which its public mystique relies. Outside the formal boundaries of the royal residences, the broader political and public context added an extra layer of peril to the entire episode. At a time when the general public was navigating severe economic pressures, rising living costs, and financial uncertainty, the notion of a reigning monarch attempting to strip a long-standing residence from a working brother who had personally funded its restoration would have ignited an uncontrollable public backlash. The royal family operates on a delicate social contract sustained by public goodwill and taxpayer support. Engaging in aggressive property disputes and retroactive asset confiscations directly threatens that contract, inviting intense parliamentary scrutiny and Republican debate. The fact that the central administration ultimately chose to back down rather than risk public exposure demonstrated a sharp awareness of these external vulnerabilities, even if the initial decision to pursue the audits revealed a dangerous disconnect from public realities. As the dust settled on the events of March 26th, the internal power dynamics of the monarchy crystallized into two distinct and opposing centers of gravity. At the core site's Buckingham Palace, occupied by King Charles and Queen Camilla, continuing to champion their vision of a streamlined, centralized, and strictly controlled institution. In their view, modernizing the monarchy requires consolidating assets, reducing the footprint of extended family members, and bringing every historical artifact and residential property under direct central oversight. This approach prioritizes administrative efficiency and a tightly managed corporate image above all else, seeking to project an aura of disciplined austerity to a watchful public. Operating entirely independently from that central axis, however, is a formidable counterweight. A coalition of senior royals who have demonstrated both the will and the capacity to hold an immovable line against administrative overreach. Anchored by Princess Anne, Prince Edward, and the Duchess of Edinburgh, and supported quietly but firmly by the Prince and Princess of Wales, this secondary power center represents continuity, institutional memory, and the protection of historical precedent. They are not operating as rebellious factions seeking to destabilize the crown. Rather, they are acting as constitutional guardians, ensuring that the foundational promises made by previous sovereigns are honored and that the personal dignity of working family members is not sacrificed on the altar of temporary administrative expedients. This division of power has profound implications for the future governance of the household. The younger generation watching these developments unfold, particularly individuals like James, Earl of Wessex, and Lady Louise Windsor, absorbed lessons that will shape their perspectives for the rest of their lives. They witnessed firsthand how their parents successfully navigated a high-stakes institutional crisis without resorting to public emotional outbursts, theatrical confrontations, or damaging media leaks. Instead, they saw that preparation, meticulous documentation, unyielding solidarity, and strategic resolve represent the most effective tools for survival within a complex and often unforgiving institution. The attempt by Central Palace advisors to prematurely strip them of their protected status and push them into isolation was decisively thwarted, ensuring that their future trajectory remains governed by family choice and personal preference rather than administrative decree. When members of the public observe the royal family at future national commemorations, state banquets, and balcony appearances, they will witness the customary display of harmony and shared purpose. The choreography of public life will continue to deliver the comforting illusion of a seamless, united family working hand in hand for the nation. The pageantry will unfold with its usual precision, the state carriages will roll down the mall on schedule, and the traditional narrative of royal unity will be faithfully broadcast to millions around the globe. Yet, for everyone operating within the inner circle of the institution, the surface appearance will be understood for what it is: a necessary public performance masking a deeply altered internal reality. They will know that a major structural battle was fought and won behind closed doors, proving that the absolute authority of the throne is subject to the rule of law. They will know that a dedicated coalition of senior royals stood up against administrative overreach and forced the Central Palace to step back in writing. That historical record, securely preserved in official archives, will endure long after the current generation has passed from the stage. When future historians examine this era, they will recognize March 25th as the pivotal moment when the limits of modern royal power were definitively tested and established. Ultimately, the events surrounding the defense of Bagshot Park and the Anthem Tiara demonstrated that the true strength of the British monarchy does not rest solely on the personal preferences of whoever happens to occupy the reigning seat at any given moment. It rests upon the enduring power of formal contracts, the sanctity of legal commitments, and the vigilance of those willing to defend the legacy of the past against the shifting tides of the present. By securing their home, their history, and their personal dignity through unassailable legal engineering and unwavering familial unity, Prince Edward, Sophie, and Princess Anne ensured that their place within the institution remained protected, permanent, and entirely beyond the reach of institutional turbulence.